So as you may know, some of you may know, I've just been on a journey. I had a wonderful opportunity to have a trip back to my home temples in Korea. And this is always a very enlightening experience for me, and helps me also grow in my Dhamma and my appreciation of the Buddhist teachings. Even though our traditions have a little bit of a different form, still the practice and the teachings are essentially the same. And then I was very fortunate. I was invited to teach in Malaysia. Not that I did a lot of teaching. We had to change the dates, so the teaching schedule also was changed. But there were many informal talks with friends, and they took me to a katina in Thailand, Ajahn Chalo's temple, and some of you may have visited there, Andagiri. And we also visited Ajahn Nanan. So I've had a very fulfilling time, bridging traditions, cultures, food, and Dhamma, lots of Dhamma discussions. So today actually I want to talk a little bit about some of what, when life is so full and there's so much engagement on many levels, there is something that we often forget that really allows us to be so engaged. And this is that silence or that stillness that's forever pervading the situations. In Korea it is it was the height of the monsoon. The monsoon followed me actually from Korea to Malaysia to Thailand. And so in the monsoon, in all these countries, there's a vibrancy of noise. The rivers are rushing. In my home temple, there's a big river that runs around the temple. So the river is full of water and rushing. The forest is full of life, and the cicadas are singing their lungs out. The birds, the animals, just the life is full of this vibrant activity of noise. So in a way, when you're talking about the stillness and the quietness in meditation, it's hard to imagine amidst so much activity and sound. And yet, when I went back to my little room in this compound, and this compound will have been there at least, I don't know, maybe 1,000 years. You know, buildings come and go. But there's still some wood blocks that are over 1,000 years old that are housed in this little compound called the Flower Garland, the Hwaamjon, which is the Flower Garland compound. And back to the little room where when I first ordained, I lived with several other nuns, and we've talked about that before, in this little room. And there are 2 other monks who live in that compound. And I go back into this little room, and someone's put a little fire under the floor to make the room warm. It's hard to imagine why you want a warm room in summer, but they still put a little fire in there. And I just slipped back into that time where I lived there, in a way. Nothing much has changed. You know, the gardens seem to be similar. The monk attends the gardens and plants strawberries, the same things that I witnessed when I lived there. And yet, in my time, there was a lot of opportunity to reflect on what is beyond all this noise. when we go in our meditation, we actually first hear what is rather abrasive, what is strong, what is pounding our senses, just as we do in the visual world. We're absolutely caught up in, the neon lights in Asia, or we're caught up in all the visual aspects that either attract us or don't. But in this little place, this little room where I can just be still and the only light coming through the paper doors, my mind has an opportunity to filter, to hear distinctly and yet filter. And in filtering, there becomes a space between the rustles and the chirps, and a space between my thoughts and what's cognizing, what's listening, who's listening. And in this space, there is a silent knowing. In any meditation practice, we come to a place of silently knowing. It's a wisdom that's innate within all of us. Without that silent knowing, you can't hear me. You can't digest what I'm saying. But when we have the ability to be a little bit quiet in our lives, even amidst a market or a city or a crowded bus, we have this ability to go into this silent knowing. And for the week I was there, I made this my practice. Whether I was talking with monks, and this is a monk monastery, so there weren't other nuns there, or some lay people, or whether I was sitting alone or going for a walk, I stayed with this silent knowing as much as I could. And it expresses itself in many ways, beyond the thoughts that come to our mind about sound. It expresses itself in ways that are very new and very fresh and very real. And I found that the more I listened, the more I could be present with, then I actually could differentiate very deep processes within my mind. We often think we have to go away on a retreat for a week or 2 weeks or a month to still the mind to that level, but actually we don't. We just have to be extremely discerning about what it is we're connecting with, what it is we're listening to in this case. I mean, apart from the illusory sounds of my own thinking, I mean, thoughts in a way have a sound, or they have a sense. There is this capacity to differentiate in a moment-to-moment way what's unfolding. So say I'm listening to a whole gamut of sounds in the forest. Some are quite audible, distinguishable, I know what they are. But as I'm listening and distilling these sounds, there are those which arise and pass away very quickly, or they overlap, or they like the water sounds, the river sounds, and the sounds of people, and the sounds of the wind in the trees, they can tend to overlap. But there is a sort of a melody in them. They arise, they stay a little while, and as they're passing away, others come to the forefront and grab your attention. In the beginning, I was wanting to sort of really distinguish them. There's people coming. And there were stories coming with that. Or the rain started to pour, and I was listening to it in its thunderous downpour, or in its minute drips as it starts to still. But in between this, even with the thunderous downpour, there is another layer behind it. It might just be the gate shutting, or it might have just been a sharp, unaudible sound of a branch or something falling. And what started to happen in my body as I was processing this is a connection, a physical connection with sound. Almost a visual connection with sound. I don't know if any of you have experienced in your meditation retreats where when you're looking into pain, it starts to become a visual experience, or it starts to become a sensational experience in another way, maybe auditory. But for me, the physical auditory experience was not only vibratory, there was a vibration, but there was this silence. And we don't think of sound in silence, but there is sound in silence. When you listen very deeply in your own meditation, each one of us has a unique sound. It may be a sort of a murmur or a bubbling type of sound. It may actually be a deep penetrating whistle. Or it may be some other sound that captures your mind so profoundly that all other distractions fall away. It is a wonderful way to deepen the concentration, deepen our awareness. So when this has started to develop, I've recognized it in my practice for a long time, but when it started to take hold, just in 1 or 2 days, it was something I could take with me while I was walking, while I was eating, conversing. And it kept the mind at a pitch of awareness that I was very mindful about all sorts of things happening for me. Little things of my feet as I was walking across the plank over the rushing water, my feet just shuffling across the wood, or picking up something. Each seemed to have a sound. Do you hear your footsteps when you walk? Rarely. Do you hear yourself pick up something? Can you hear when you pick up your glasses? Rarely. Do you notice when you put something down? Rarely. We might notice when we chunk the chopsticks on the side of a bowl or a spoon. We might notice, the sound when we turn on the car. But often we don't even notice these very gross sounds, let alone the placing something down, the picking it up. Even holding it, there is a subtle sound. When I went to visit the old master, who now is nearly 90, and just sitting in a chair, everyone is very quiet around him, so as not to disturb him. But when I went in there, I actually found the room was vibrant with energy, vibrant with his conscious awareness, his wakefulness. His body is slowly coming to its end, but his mind is really alive. And so in that luminous space, again sound crackles. Our own minds become very connected. Not very much needs to be said. It was so interesting in Korea how little was being said. And just at this time, something very scary was going on in Korea, as you might know. The news was full of the possibility that North Korea and Mr. Trump would do something stupid. So of course, you know, Korea is Japan are very close targets of demise. Can you imagine, you know, in 30 seconds, Seoul would be gone. And so there was another silence. There was something, people actually weren't talking about it. They were listening. But they weren't talking about it. The possibility is just too scary. And so in this, I had another reflection. When the mind is really steeped in fear, there's another space of wakefulness that comes with that. After about a week in my home temple, I went to visit my nun teacher's temple. I'll take a little journey on sound today. And in my nun teacher's temple, it was a hub of activity. Korea is having a difficult time now because very few are ordaining. But those who are ordaining are working very hard. They're working doubly hard to keep the temples running. And I noticed the monastic were very engaged, very active, bustling, and I haven't seen that for a long time. They've been rather comfortable for a long time. And yet, there was this sort of almost a superficial level of merriment. You know, they were actually quite heightened in a gleeful way, in a happy way. And I thought, oh, this is, again, you know, they're working so hard, they're enjoying their life as a monastic. So I took this practice of listening, just listening. And then over where I was invited to have a cup of tea, or coffee now, coffee's the thing, I just listened. I didn't have to ask very much. but so much was needing to be expressed. And again, I took that practice of listening beyond the obvious, beyond just the words, to what's really being said. And that's not an easy listening, it's a very deep listening. Thich Nhat Hanh often talks about this capacity, just being with and deeply listening. And in this listening, I discovered, yes, there was a little bit of the heightened fear that I spoke of because of all the news. But more, there was a sadness. There was a sense of sadness of a possible impending loss, or the obvious little losses that seemed to be happening. And for all of us, we were sitting there, enjoying this tea. But when people feel they're sad or have a loss, they also can have this excitement. Have you ever felt that? It's a sort of a nervous excitement. So I noticed this throughout the temple. My old nun teacher now, who again is nearly 90, is unable to, expend her power and energy in the usual way, but she's still very present. And everything is running extremely smoothly. But the weight of unknowing was developing this excitement. And so I was seen as being very contained and peaceful. And so I was asked to give some talks, which I usually do. And then afterwards, the nuns came and wanted to know more about the Korean way of meditation. They'd been studying other forms. They'd been studying Vipassana because it is easier for them to understand and practice. But they had also started to lose some of their traditional forms, so we talked a lot about meditation. But then I brought into the mix this aspect of entering into one's inner sound. In Korean Zen we have what's called a hwadu, and the hwadu offers us a practice which is to grasp before the mind formulates its thinking. It's actually, hwadu means where thoughts arise, the place where thoughts arise. And in this place, this spaciousness that I speak of this stillness, is very present. But in that there is a tremendous vibrancy of mind. There's a tremendous alertness, a wakefulness. And so we started to talk about the capacity to be alert and awake amidst anything that might happen, pleasant or unpleasant, expected or unexpected, that we can still stay totally open, totally focused, and totally deep within our own true nature, our own true being. And we talked about how to do this. And this is something I want to talk about a little bit more here. When we actually talk usually about meditation, we take an object, our breathing, our sensations, our thoughts. But I was asking them to take the object of silence. And the object of silence is not an easy thing to grasp. If I say to you, show me your silence. And I wanted them to not go into what it is they know, not what they've heard, what the teachers have told them, what the Buddha has told them. I wanted them to go into that place of unknowing, into that place of inquiry and searching. And that's a sort of, if you haven't practiced in this way, it's a certain uncertainty. You can't just say, we tend to sort of say, well, the Dhamma is this. The Buddha talked about it like this. And it's all very certain. If we just practice the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Paths, it sounds all very certain. But to do that, you actually have to go into what it is you don't know. And by going into what it is you don't know means that you're slowly saying, it's not that. And it's not that. We can see in the sound, so we went through an exercise of listening. We could see very clearly the inner sounds, the subtle, we swallow, there's a subtle swallowing sound, we die, there's tummy rumbles, there's subtle sounds around the movement of clothes on our body. Even we might notice the bones crunching. The lips, sounds around the lips and the tongue. Teeth chattering, gnarring. And as you go in more, you can actually even hear the eyes close. The mind settles and it starts to take on the sound of sensations, little subtle sensations. And then we took the sounds out a little bit further to what it was in the immediate vicinity that surrounded us. And as we took these sounds further and further out, they became a little bit inaudible. We couldn't distinguish one sound from the other. It just becomes like a noise, traffic noise, in the distance. And as you go into that murmur, something quite interesting happens. The mind sort of goes into that personal sound I spoke of. If you go deep into that murmur, deep into that non-differentiation of sound, you enter some part of yourself that is sound itself. It's a vibration of sound itself. It's not out there. We think we're hearing it as if we're stretching our ears out in the distance. But it's not out there. We're hearing it deep within ourselves. And slowly what happens is you come back. You start to notice and distinguish every single sound as if it's on its own. It's sharp, it's clear, or it's dull and diffused, but you hear it very clearly. Just for a moment, just listen in this room to what you hear. Everyone becomes very still, so it's less audible. You hear my voice. You might even hear a ringing, or you might even hear, more likely, the sounds outside. But slowly, the nuns could experience, over a couple of days, a few days, they started to experience, amidst all the summer sounds, which are very loud there too, a sound that allowed them to be very present in whatever it is they're doing. They weren't caught up in the story in their head, or the jittering, jabbering fears that were sort of being spoken about. They were starting to settle in to just a place of just being with it. And something interesting happened. They started to actually not only relax, but they started to become a little quieter. Within a few days, we could have a cup of tea and not have to, have a big conversation about everything. They started to feel it's okay to be a little quiet, and with that quiet, and also okay to be with their anxieties about the world at that moment. It was okay to be with tensions within the temple life, because the stresses were a lot. There's really a small population to do a very big job. So they were able to focus more on their job and not worry about the bigger picture. All of these come out of whatever meditation technique you have. The product of it is that you start to behave in a real way with the situations arising before you. Things are as they are, and you interact with them. So I left Korea and went to the suburbs of Kuala Lumpur. Not so unlike the suburbs here, but, they're a suburb. And I took my practice into a home. Mind you, it was a very comfortable home, and the people were very sincerely practicing, and so it was easy. Food was presented on the dot, and everything was very clean, and everybody meditated, 3 children all meditating. I haven't quite been in such a well practice family for a while. And so I took my practice into that environment. Still summer, still rainy season, still the noise of summer, when you get the burst of energy of growth, you get the burst of energy of noise. But suburbia noise is different. Everywhere in Kuala Lumpur there's big gates. So you're getting the big gates, chunk, as they open and close, chunk. And the wheels of cars squeak on their marbled, tiled floor of the driveway, So they became very different and very distinct sounds. At first, something interesting happened. I reached out for those curious sounds, trying to identify them in that usual way. I went back to that stage one of, oh, that's new, what's that? Took a day or two, but it didn't take long to settle back into this practice of listening. without expectation of outcome, without seeking some answer. I mean, there's not an answer to be sought there. It's an experience. It wasn't about knowing something. It wasn't about achieving something. There wasn't a goal. So often we have all these things that are our little temptations for practice. We need something that's going to bring you here on a Sunday. I'm sorry, it's probably not one of the Theravada monks giving you a wonderful Theravada Dhamma talk. And you're getting the talk on silence, which is completely other. But my point again is how to bring that into whatever was happening in that environment. And then what happened was the family became very silent. They all, I felt like a very old nun that was being well managed, you might say. Everybody was trying to be very nice, very careful, and very quiet. And then we went to Thailand. Again, all the same, the rains, the monsoons, the lush environment. Andagiri was beautiful, but it was the katina. And with the katina comes the bustle of so many people and so much preparation and so much expectation and so much food. So the 3 or 4 days we had preparing for katina, everybody was making these beautiful leis. Everywhere you have calendula. They grow the calendula to sew all the flowers together to make these big leis to put around all the Buddhas. And in Andagiri there's so many Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. He likes his Bodhisattvas. And the hope that magical things will happen. And somehow I was in another zone. From the time I landed, I was in another zone. Well, it was all very new. It wasn't like Korea, where I was familiar. And I'd been to Kuala Lumpur before, and I was familiar with that environment and the people. This was all quite new for me. I haven't been to Thailand forest monasteries for a very long time. And especially one, so beautiful. And so I was, and because suddenly everybody becomes very holy, when they go to a monastery like that, their behavior becomes heightened. They all become they wear beautiful white clothes, and they're all trying their best to keep their precepts, and it's building up. There's a heightened tension building up. And I'm just floating in this samadhi of, you could almost, it's not a oneness, but it's a samadhi of a stillness, level of stillness. And just taking in the sound. Just being with the sound. Again, the subtle sounds were something that was, by this stage, really captivating my interest. And watching the mind, the mind always is quick to want to make itself known. And something quite interesting happened. We were listening to, on the day of the Katina, or the next day maybe, listening to a talk by Ajahn Brahm. And it was the day of the Katina, all in Thai. So my listening became listening to a 2-hour lecture in Thai. A 2-hour lecture in Thai, and everybody in the room who couldn't speak Thai, moving, shuffling, rustling, getting things from their bag, talking. talking to each other. And Ajahn Chala's voice is getting louder and louder and louder. And I'm sitting and listening to this very conflicting. It was like an orchestra getting louder and louder because my own sensations in my body were bursting in their capacity to stay with it all. And then it got to a heightened pitch. And suddenly I had to go to the bathroom. You know, it was over 2 hours, and I sat there, you know, thinking, oh, it's going to finish soon. My own meditation was starting to slide as the physical urges were growing. And I had to go to the bathroom. And so suddenly when I lifted up, half the room lifted up to take me to the bathroom because it became the excuse for them all to go, you know, and stretch their legs. So I sort of go out with an entourage of people all going to go behind me, and they're all walking very mindfully, you know. And those who've been to Andgiri, there's absolutely magnificent things, and then there's very dangerous things. So one of the little dangers is that in stepping from this beautiful path down to the path that goes to the toilet, there's a big gap. And I'm in my mixture of floating mind, because now I'm the queen with the entourage coming behind me. I'm relieved of all my suffering from sitting listening to trying to keep mindful of the sound of Thai. And so I'm floating along like this, and the next thing I go, clunk, straight down the hole. Straight down the hole, flat on my face. And all, you know, everyone's all around trying to lift this lead up. And suddenly, in that moment, that very, you know, it's a mixture of shock and a mixture of practice. You know, I don't know, you know, when you go through a bubble in your meditation, something bursts. And it was a bit of a burst. The fall was such a clunk. Nothing was broken. I didn't particularly hurt myself, except it was quite a deep fall. But something jolted in the mind and the practice. And all I could do was laugh. And I laughed, and I laughed, and then everyone started laughing. And there was this deep sense of joy, you know, in the sense that it wasn't about the stillness or the non-stillness, because it was definitely not still at that moment. And it wasn't about trying to keep a practice anymore. We were all there just in that moment, mostly close to the ground, laughing. And you know, sometimes in practice when we have a little bit of an illumination or a little bit of revelation, we laugh. You know, we get a smile on our face and a little chuckle. But it wasn't about that. I wasn't enlightened in that moment. It was about a realness, something that was very real. A lot of things all came together in that moment, and they were very real. I was flat on the floor. Everyone was trying to lift me up. They're all trying to be very careful, you know, as if they had some sort of precious gem. And it was very real. Anyway, I did go to the bathroom and we came back. The talking was still going on, so we decided we needed a little time out. And we sat outside. And just at that moment, in the sky, it was quite interesting. Oh no, that was the next day, sorry. But anyway, that day passed. And the next day, Ajahn asked me to give, or might have been that evening, that night, to do a chant. So the big thing was now about me giving a Mahayana chant. And I go in. I had given a little chant earlier when we did a blessing with the Kuan Yin, but he wanted more. And we go in and I start. And he says, repeat it. So repeat it 3 times. And then he's still sitting there quietly, so then I thought I'd better chant a little bit more. So I did this long chant, this other long chant. And he was very delighted in this, and I think because I'd been doing this quiet, silent sort of meditation and stillness meditation, the voice somehow just boomed out, It had all this strength, or maybe after the laughter the voice boomed out. And he had a big smile. He was very happy. He said to his one of his other monks, he felt fulfilled. So I felt that was nice. I could, my silence and stillness practice was fulfilling something else other than myself. And just when we went out, the sky had this. It was a full moon. And I'd been following the full moon since I left. Australia was full moon, and Korea was full moon, and there was full moon. And this full moon was it was like a dragon giving birth to the moon. It was in the eye of the dragon, this cloud in the sky, perfect clear sky, except for this dragon. And suddenly the moon shone out of like an eye, or part of its head came out as this, and everyone came up and clicking. And I pointed out, I said, it's, this is like that, in that emptiness and spaciousness that comes from becoming so still in your practice, so silent in your practice, it gives birth to something. It can be anything. But when that mind gives birth, in that moment, it's a very proud, it's like being a parent giving birth. It's a very proud moment. You're in awe. You're mesmerized. You're totally connected, because it's something that's beyond anything you can rationalize, anything you can put a label to. It suddenly is coming forth. And this is the beauty of the Dhamma, because when truth is revealed, when the mind has let go of all its ambition, of all its creations, of all its expectations, in any one moment, it is revealed. Why it's revealed in a dragon giving birth to the moon, who knows? But I think Ajahn Chalo, I believe, is a magician for making miraculous things happen. Or whether my chanting helped, I don't know. And then just the last tale, and I'll finish in a moment. At the end of this wonderful trip, we're going to Ajahn Nun's place. And that's really another spectacular monastery, and they're building this great big stupa. And we met Ajahn Nun. And I'm sitting, I actually was invited to sit at least in the hall with the monks, not with the other Anagarikas outside, but right down past the male Anagarika. So I'm sitting there, and he said, look, the monks will go out and they'll get their food, and they'll have their food, and then we can go. And I assumed, I saw the monks all going out, and I'm sitting there in my my stillness and taking everything in, and the sounds of chanting and the sounds in the forest and the sounds of monks rising and walking out quietly, and I'm just staying with my sound meditation. And then the anagarika, motions me to come, and I notice the monks have gone out, trickled out in little groups, but they don't come back in. And so I thought, they must be eating their meal outside somewhere. They do pindapata out, maybe they go out and sit under a bush or something. And so we go out and we get our food, and we come back in, and I sit there, and I don't notice any monks, and so I open my bowl and I start eating my food. And the anagarika starts eating. And then the monks come back in and they all open their bowls and start eating. And it was very interesting. In all of that, this is where you learn something about yourself. As much as you try when you go into another culture to do it right and to behave in the appropriate way and to listen and to practice, still. And the lay people, Joyce, who was sitting down in the lay people, she looked back, and I'm way over there, and she thought, is Kwang eating? But she said she didn't think she could come and tell me not to eat, But at that time I didn't see any monks. Later I saw one monk bring his bowl in and polish it. That's just when I started. I thought, they've all eaten. And then the others all came in with their bowls and sat down and started eating. So even when you try, it's never going to be perfect. Even when you try to still the mind or to have a practice of concentration that you develop over quite a long time, many years, still there will be moments where it's completely gone. And the interesting thing, everybody had been so pious and so careful and so mindful. And in their little chit-chat in the buses, but, it was okay. As soon as we left Ajahn Brahm's temple, it was party time. By this time, I'm sort of a little blissed out. We've met Ajahn Brahm. He didn't say much, but a few profound things, and you could feel, this tremendous energy around him. He's got a lot of Deva protection. And we get in the bus, and I don't know whether it was just being with him, everyone went wild. Absolutely wild, and I'm sitting there in my silence and the bus is bouncing and vibrating with the excited chit-chatter. Noise was so loud. And they couldn't hear it. 12 or whatever, 13 of us in the bus. Everyone's so excited. They're all going off to go to the market and what they're going to buy and where they're going and what they're going to eat and whatever they're talking about. And that then became another practice, another layer to listening, to being with. It was a little bit of discursive thought going on in the beginning, and then I thought, no, it's just more sound, more noise, more vibration of noise. And in that again, my mind went very still in that recognition and could take it all in. So I think whatever it is we're doing as a practice, it has to develop in the circumstances we are in. If we're in the forest, it's very easy, especially if you're in a comfortable room that you're very familiar with. If it's in suburbia and you're very used to your suburban environment, it's also reasonably, a lot of friends in suburbia say it's very quiet. And I go down there and I hear the dogs barking and I hear the cars going up and down the street and the doors slamming. And but in a way it is quiet. In the jungle, it's what it is. And in the bustling noise of a market or a city or a car full of kids, it is what it is. But what we can do with that is make it a practice to be with it and to listen indiscriminately and to hear the spaces between. There's always a space, there's always a rising, a pitch, a sliding away, and a space. And those spaces are very precious. It's in that space that we can enter a deep sense of stillness. So I'll let you, if you have any questions about this, it's probably a good time to ask. And thank you for listening very, very attentively. And I hope that you may be able to take some of this. This is just one practice, but something of this and bring it into your own practice. So you can learn to practice anywhere, at any time, and feel supported in that.